Okay, so welcome to this event on digital platform regulation, a super important topic, and one where there is a lot of thinking and a lot of lobbying and a lot of designing going on in Brussels and elsewhere. And so I'm Jeremy Zettelmeier, I'm the director of Bruegel. The first, I would say, among 3 stars in this event is my friend and colleague Fiona Scott Morton, who has been thinking about these topics for a long time. And so because, in a sense, these issues are crystallizing over the last 12 months and in the near future, she helpfully has decided to put together a collection of things she has written on them in the form of a book, which is right here. Digital Platform Regulation, Making Markets Work for People. Now, can I tell people where they can get this without helping a particular digital platform, or just go to Yale, okay? But it may also be on Amazon, I'm not sure. It's not, okay, well. Okay, you can download it for free. Wow, okay, there you go. To Fiona's Yale website. So Fiona, of course, is senior fellow at Bruegel since 2023 and a professor of economics at Yale School of Management and also at the law school now. And so we are super happy to have her here. We were also super happy to have Coco Carmona here, who is the executive director of CODE. So CODE is the Coalition for Open Digital Ecosystems. It's a group of companies that fight for and are interested in openness and competition in the digital space. And then, last but not least, we have Emanuele Tarantino, the chief economist of DG Comp, the competition authority of the EU, and he is, like his predecessors, an academic. You still are, I suppose, professor of economics at Louis, right? And presumably on leave while you're doing that, and you're also a research affiliate at CEPR. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to invite Fiona to come to the stage and give a little overview, right? So this is almost like getting an Oscar for Lifetime Achievement. So there will be like, this is not one movie, this is many movies, and they've been sort of condensed in a little presentation. And she will give us this overview. When she's done, I will then invite all 3 panelists to the stage, and then there will be some comments from Coco and from Emanuele, and then there will be a conversation which Fiona will moderate. So at that point, I will no longer be needed, and I will switch places with them. Fiona, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the kind introduction, and thank you to Emanuele and Coco for coming. This is great pleasure. I have a few slides. Let me see if they work. What happens now? Anastasia. Oh, good. Okay, so I put some disclosures up because I do some antitrust consulting as well as this is how I learned how the real world works, which is great fun. But the main point of today is this book, which is the work of several years, as Darren has pointed out, and this is the URL for where you can download it. It's just free and available. So anyway, the hard copies are actually, I only make 50 hard copies, so I'm afraid you cannot have one. They'll use up. Okay, let me tell you what's in it. This is the table of contents. So first, a little bit of the explanation from the economist perspective of fairness and contestability, and then the fair bit about app stores, because I think they're very important. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. I will talk specifically about the chicken and egg problem and the Apple App Store. Also, there are chapters on personal data, competition between platforms, this is e-commerce, local law and search, and then just a little bit at the end on industrial policy. And I will highlight three areas there. And I will just really, as Jeremy said, these are super condensed movies. There will be a movie on the slide. So just so you had plenty of time for chatting. Okay, so chicken and the egg. What is quite interesting about the DNA is that it mandates effective compliance. And you might ask, well, what constitutes effectiveness? Effectiveness occurs when the interface is sufficiently open and non-discriminatory that the business user can enter and have a proper business model. So if we assume that the regulator is not understanding the details of the technology, because there's 90 of them and there's a lot to do, then the only party that actually can assess compliance is the business user. They try to enter, they try to make their wallet work, their app store work, their advertising work. And if it cannot, then they have to go and complain to the commission and say, this is not working, there's not compliance, is not affected. Now, possibly the business user is not sufficiently skilled. That's always a possibility, but there's another possibility, which is there isn't compliance. Now, then we have a problem because without entry of business users, you cannot know if there's compliance. And it's the business users that tell you about compliance. But in the absence of compliance, there will not be any business users. Who is going to spend money to invest and get good at something if they cannot get it? So it's actually quite difficult to enforce in this environment because you need business users to tell you what's wrong, and until things are fixed, you don't have business users. So this is a challenge. App stores, I think, are extremely important. You know that Apple is the monopolist on the app on its platform and Google Play on its. And I want to make sure everybody understands the distinction between a review of an app, which is about its functionality and its safety, and the distribution of an app. So let's assume we leave the review of the apps in the hands of the operating system. So Apple reviews all apps and approves them as safe. Same with Android. Then the question is, can the developer choose how they would like to distribute the app? Through the gatekeeper's app store or a rival app store, for money, for ads, however they want to do it. And ideally you have a universal search function on the first page so that you put in the app you're interested in and the operating system tells you which store
It's located in. This is how video often works. The conversation around these app stores is all about price. Apple talks constantly about price, 30%, gaming, pornography. It's all about could we get a few percentage points of savings, and that's going to be a problem for quality and privacy and security, and is that really worth it to let gamers pay 25% instead of 30%? And I actually don't think that's where the welfare lies at all. I think the welfare, price competition is good, but I think the welfare lies in different business models for app stores. It would be great to have curation availability so that there could be a children's app store, and you could put the children's app store with the 300 safe apps that are already approved by the gatekeeper in it, and you take the other one off. And then you could give that to your child. An app store that screened apps for being low carbon footprint so that people who want to patronize those businesses could go there. Something like a cooperative of newspapers that could have a method of payment in the store and a policy of data sharing, and then the news would not be paying 30% to the gatekeeper. They would have their own store that they paid cost because it's a co-op venture. And then things like the Estonian government would quite like to have an app store to allow voting on mobile, but current app stores track what you do reasonably enough, and you can't put a voting app in a place like that. So they need their own store to have secure voting. So these are the kinds of innovations that we could have if we had competition in app stores, and they just have nothing to do with the commission percentage, though I think, as I said, price competition is always good. Such stores could also become middleware. We see this in China with WeChat. And what middleware does, because you log into the store and you have a lot of your social media and phones and communications and banking in your store, you then become able to switch between operating systems much more easily. And this creates an incentive for a rival operating system to enter. Because there are a bunch of users attached to a store, the store can write a version for the new operating system and everyone switches. So this would really encourage competition in mobile operating systems, which we need. Okay, briefly, markets for personal data. Here is what we see in Meta today. We see, what is this graph? It's privacy, so more privacy, less data sharing as you move to the right, and then the price in money on the vertical axis. If you think about privacy as being quality, then higher quality costs more money, so that's why the blue line slopes up. As we move to more privacy, it's reasonable to pay money because you are not able to be shown valuable ads, so you have to give the platform some compensation. Alternatively, as you share less and less data, share more and more data going toward the axis, then you're more valuable to the platform, and at some point the platform will be paying you instead of you paying the platform. Where are we today in Europe? We are at the huge red dot, which is maximal data extraction and zero price. And there's also a small red dot. You can have maximal data extraction and pay money. Okay, that's the other option. Not clear why anybody would want that. And this hatched red dot where the two lines cross is a place where if you go into all the settings on Meta and turn off everything you're allowed to turn off, you can get to a more reasonable amount of data sharing, but it's still at a price of zero. So this is not a good way for consumers to be compensated for sharing something that is valuable and belongs to them. We really need a menu that looks like this. So it's fine to pay to be private. There should be a default that's a reasonable level of data sharing, and then if Meta wants to pay consumers by giving them €2 off their Vodafone bill or something, then this would be fine for sharing a level of data that's not exploitative. And the DSA is quite clear about what's dangerous personal data, like religion and politics and sex and things like that. So right now we're in the middle of trying to figure out what this center dot should be. What is the right amount of data that's acceptable to be a default and not exploitative and consistent with the law. I want to talk for a minute about personal social networks like Facebook and Instagram. What's the problem here? The direct network effects. I mean, we are accustomed to these. They happen on email, they happen on phones. We have a phone that can talk to, Vodafone can phone someone on Orange, Orange can phone someone on O2 or whatever. Same with email. I join an ISP and I have access to the full network. So it's very easy to make competition in personal social networks. You mandate interoperability, and this turns them into email. Now, let's be clear, you only mandate interoperability for the dominant firm. The little ones can choose if they want to be interoperable or not. Note, if you're a small social network that has entered in a world without interoperability, proprietary networks, you have a business model that does not require interoperability. You are coming in without thinking you get to interoperate. The venture capitalists who back you because you have a business model that does not need interoperability. So we don't expect that the competitors in the market today want this. The idea is you establish it, and that causes entry. And the entry is in curation. Things like, I will take all the hate speech out of your feed. I will make you happy at the end of the day. I will make your teenage daughter not have mental health problems, that kind of stuff. So the entrant gets the benefit of the full network, and the beauty of this is that the APIs to connect already exist. The monopolist loss of consumer scales with how bad they are. That is to say, if Facebook says, well, we're really big because we're really great, then publishing APIs and letting others connect would not do anything. No one would go to the rivals because they like Facebook so much. So this is only a relevant remedy if consumers actually want something else. And this is a very familiar solution, as I mentioned. There are two ways to do it. Vertical, so Facebook runs the network and the curation competitors plug in from the top, and that raises the question of who pays for the network. And horizontal, where everybody has their own network and you pass information, messages back and forth through an API. And then you have to worry about a technical committee to oversee that API because you don't want Meta to dominate it. We're used to that, though. We have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and lots of mobile phones, lots of APIs that move. Okay, I just have a couple more examples. This is a very fast tour through the book. E-commerce, price parity. These are the contracts or behavior on the part of Amazon that causes Amazon to say, where Amazon says to the merchant, if you sell at 100 euros on my platform, you must sell at 100 euros or more on everyone else's platform. And I take a 30% cut, but if the other platform takes a 10% cut, you cannot lower your end price to reflect that lower cost. I want it to be 100 euros everywhere. This raises prices on other platforms. And so you need to forbid those. In the United States, what we discovered happened is that Amazon dropped the contracts, but then what they would do is look at the other platform, observe less than $100, and put the merchant on page 5. So nobody ever bought anything. And this had the effect of having the same outcome as if there were actually an MFN. So the answer here is very easy. Stop doing that. It's probably the shortest chapter in the book. Okay, and the buy box, by the way, helps a lot with that, because in the buy box, any seller who's selling at a very, like an unusually high price is not going to be in the buy box. So the buy box is a way of having competition on the Amazon platform, where the least expensive seller with good service gets into the buy box. And so Amazon, in some sense, is getting rid of high-price sellers already. And then let me conclude with search. Obviously, if you wanted to fix search, which nobody does on either side of the Atlantic, you would do the following list. You would forbid the tying of the operating system in search. You would not allow payment for exclusives. You would not allow payment for default. You would have Google share its web index every day, and then consumers would have a neutral choice screen, and in that environment there might be some entry. I also think it would be useful if Google could only pay for half, a random half, of the users of any channel partner. So in other words, Apple could sell half of their users to Google, but the other half, they could not accept any money. So they could give them to Google for free, or they could say, wow, that's $10 billion that I'm kind of leaving on the table. Maybe I could find someone else like Perplexity or Bing who would pay for some users. So that would be a way to induce entry, which would be helpful, especially in combination with the choice screen. I think there's a bold idea in the book which I think is worth raising, and that's that it's really difficult to imagine the channel partner bargaining freely over which search engine to use when they know they have to have Google's operating system. If you're Samsung or Motorola, there's no choice. There's one operating system, and you have to have it. So if you don't put Google Search on your phone and Google gets upset with you, there are a lot of ways that you can be harmed. Your build is not improved in time for Christmas. You don't get the coolest app. Something bad could happen. So I think it would be quite nice to divest Google Android, Google Play, and Chromium into a freestanding nonprofit with a mission to serve the social good and sell at a low price. And that way, that thing could advance the technology in a neutral fashion with a big budget, because it's got enormous amounts of market power, but wouldn't be exercising that market power and tilting the playing field. So the last point is just because of the heat over competition policy today, and whether we have to throw away competition enforcement. Sorry, that's a typo on this slide. That number one should say competition enforcement. We use that for markets that generally work. There's a merger, we don't want the merger, we enforce. Industrial policy, by contrast, is for markets that are broken, where there's an externality, carbon, R&D, something that the state can fix to make the market work. And then we need regulation in places where we have a monopolist, and we can't use competition enforcement, it's too late. It's not an externality, it's a monopoly. These are three different kinds of markets. They are not in conflict with each other. So the whole debate over do we need to throw competition enforcement under the bus in order to have industrial policy is just it's just the wrong way to think about it. Okay, so that's the quick tour of the book.
Thank you, Fiona. So I'm going to invite our distinguished discussants up, and before I vacate my chair to you, let me just say that you can ask questions in person if you're in the room, and if you're not, or indeed, if you're in the room, you have a choice to ask it digitally on a platform called Slido, and the keyword is #digital. And then questions will magically appear on that screen.
Oh, I see. So I can see them.
You can see them, and you will also get a little iPad-type device.
Okay, super. Thank you, German. All right. Thank you. So maybe I will start with Emanuele. He's making eye contact. So thank you very much, both of you, for coming. I think it's really interesting to have a regulatory perspective and an industry perspective on these problems, and so please tell us what you think.
No, well, thank you for having me here. And thanks also to Bruegel for organizing this very nice event. I've been reading, I promised to Fiona, your book will be my summer read. You can imagine the interest. No, jokes apart, it's a very insightful book, very useful for sure for us. But first I would like to do my usual disclaimer, meaning that I am here representing my own views and on capacity. Whatever I may say does not indeed represent the views of DG Comp or the European Commission. So I would like to start with a short overview of the economic context, and probably that is, I thought that was useful to do it in order to frame also the contributions of the book, because we come from 2 decades where Europe has been lagging behind the US in terms of investments in productivity. And that is something that has been emphasized by the Draghi report, who turns 1 year these days, a few days ago. And this is true particularly in technologically advanced sectors. Indeed, if you take away digital, the productivity growth in Europe and US has been largely on par. So the problem is really the digital economy. And what has made the US particularly successful is creating an environment that is conducive to intangible intensive firms, those that whose success relies on data, on algorithms, on software, and on patents. Now, this has generated a tipping dynamic. Once a few successful companies manage to learn how to monetize from their intangible assets, then they gained an overwhelming large advantage over competitors. And that is what has given rise to today's largest platforms. This process is what gave birth to our big gatekeepers. Now, to be fully clear, I don't think this is per se a problematic process. This is a very genuine process that is intrinsic to intangible assets and companies that rely on it. On the other hand, however, intangible intensive companies enjoy very low marginal cost. At the same time, potential competitors or entrants face very large fixed and sunk costs to compete, to make it to the market. And this asymmetry entrenches incumbency. And so here is a crucial observation that is clearly emerging from the book. But the book goes one step farther, and I think here is where I really found it particularly insightful. That in digital markets, the situation is further complicated by the presence of network effects. And now, what happens with network effects is that it gives us the market failure that justifies the need for regulatory intervention. So essential market failure in digital markets is exactly the presence of direct and indirect network effects, so that individually each user or business or firm, being a developer, a complementer, contribution to the surplus of the platform is small. And so they get away with a small share of this surplus. However, taken collectively, their contribution is enormous. In fact, without users or developers, the platform surplus will not exist. Now, in practice, the monopolistic position of these platforms essentially is reinforced by the absence of property rights on the network effects generated by users and developers. So this is the central market failure. So the absence of these property rights implies that we need regulatory intervention to fix the problem. Now, that leads not only to allocative inefficiencies, but also to dynamic inefficiencies, because if I'm a developer and I expect to gain little from my investment, then I have no incentives to invest in the first place. So this is where, as I mentioned already a couple of times, regulation plays a role, right? By mandating interoperability, something that DMA is already doing, the book goes further by also proposing how to design workable market for personal data. In this way, regulators can reallocate property rights more effectively, giving appropriate value to users, and also reintroducing incentives to invest within the ecosystem. So ultimately, and that is a reflection goes one step ahead, the problem in digital markets, I realized even more after reading, is about appropriability of returns. Dominant platforms may have incentive to exclude potential competitors, marginalize even complementers and developers, and exploit users. This is fundamentally different from what happens in standard regulated industry like utilities, where the problem is not about appropriation, but is about remuneration of investments. Large investments that need to be sunk in order to operate in an industry that has decreasing variable cost. And so, average cost, sorry. And there, regulation is there to tame moral hazard and adverse selection. Here, instead, the challenge is to address the risk of exclusion and restore contestability. Now, second aspect I really liked of the book, and it's something on which I'm reflecting these days, is the emphasis in a couple of chapters on the presence of behavioral biases on the consumer side. These matter because they make the market failures that I just discussed even more problematic. Think of naive consumers, something on which Fiona is working, by the way. They don't fully realize how much their own data is collected within the platform. And so they don't fully internalize the fact that this data is going to be sold to advertisers to deliver them targeted ads back on the same platform. And I also learned that you can, by taking some options on Facebook, actually recreate what they say is the free option. This is very interesting. But the result is twofold. Platforms can extract more data than what is optimal for users, and users are not compensated for this. At the same time, because they don't anticipate being extracted information, they cannot adjust their choices. So these behavioral biases, of course, don't stop to naivete. There is also lock-in. There is also limits to to multi-homing, there is default settings. All of this, the book argues, means that platforms not just benefit from economies of scale and network effects, but also from predictable mistakes in consumer decision making. To conclude, what I would like to see in the future, especially by my colleagues, academic economists, is an effort to put order to this literature. There has been a lot of papers in the literature on digital markets in the last 10 years, probably less, has been booming. But most of it relies on a plethora of different models, which makes it very difficult for us in the institution to understand what are the limiting principles under which they can be used in specific cases. Ideally, what we need is an effort to systematize this body of work, which is large and very insightful, by developing a common model, a workhorse model that can be declinated in each of the questions that the book raises. And this is happening, this will happen already in other sectors where regulation is in place, like utilities or finance. It is still not there in digital markets.
Is it? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Bruegel, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and not only to discuss regulation. I'm going to be maybe a bit more general and bring the policy and the user's perspective, but to take part in a conversation about Europe's digital direction. It's always important to speak about that, but now perhaps it's particularly relevant. We have DMA live and being tested. We celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the Draghi's report, which I think challenged us all to think bigger in terms of what Europe's digital competitiveness means. As opposed to Emanuele, I'm not here on my own capacity. I'm here representing CODE. CODE is the Coalition for Open Digital Ecosystems. A very brief introduction context for those that are not fully familiar. It's a coalition formed a couple of years ago of a very, very broad range of companies, from large platforms to startups, to OEMs, software developers, telecom operators. And you would think, why? What's the link? Well, the link was the belief that open and interoperable systems are better for growth, for consumer, for innovation, really. And is this belief that openness is what makes everybody included in the digital economy, to go back to the title of the panel. And inclusion for CODE is not just who is online, but it's about who has the access to the opportunity, the ability to scale, to innovate, to compete. And that only happens when systems are truly open, interoperable, contestable, from the ground up, and that's an important distinction. Without that, I think we risk building systems that may seem open from the outset, but are really function like a series of closed and vertically integrated ecosystems. I'm especially glad to be here speaking about this, anchored in your book, Fiona, which I have to admit, I'm nearly there, but I haven't finished. But the first thing that struck me was how closely aligned it is with CODE principles and where we see the challenge is. One idea that really stood up for me is the argument that security and openness are not mutually exclusive. I think we need to go past this idea, this false trade-off, and instead start designing systems that are interoperable, contestable, and transparency as a prerequisite for security and not a threat to it. You describe interoperability as a kind of a super tool. for platform governance, and I think that's a very cool term. And that's exactly how we see this at Code. Whether you're building a browser, a payment system, a AI system, a messaging app, open systems always outperform closed ones for us, and for users, innovation, as I was saying before, for growth. So if we take Fiona's framing seriously, and I think we should, then the goal of DMA shouldn't just be compliance and fines, but really a structural change. And that means for us designing openness from the architecture, not just as an afterthought, which is the risk that we are starting to see. Of course, DMA for us brought early wins, and we have one of our members, the browser, Opera, which saw a 60% increase in iOS downloads just after a month. Choice screen was really introduced, and that's a very clear and tangible illustration of how design choices, even small ones, can open competition. But the truth is that, and what we experience as representing business users, is that this is not the rule. It's still really an exception. And in other areas like messaging or wearables, interoperability is still being locked, it's delayed, it's been watered down, and users don't really see the benefit. And the problem is probably the lack of legal provisions, and we're not going to enter into enforcement, but it's also the tendency to think about openness as a compliance tool box rather than as a design principle. So from Code's point of view, if we want a smart regulation that delivers fair and more open markets, again, to go back to the title of the panel, we need to hold DMA to some of the standards that you set in your book, Fiona. Enforce interoperability by design. Gatekeepers should face very clear evidence-based criteria for invoking privacy, security, and IP arguments, and not use them as blanket vetoes. Of course, they are very important values, and they should be upheld, but they should not be the excuse and not put them against openness. So any justification should be very evidence-based, proportionate, of course, and very specific. And then focus on the outcomes and not really on and not only on the processes. Interoperability should be there from day one. Maybe we can expand on that, how we think it should be done. And the Commission has taken very important steps. The 6.7 specification procedures are one of them, and that's very encouraging. But the goal shouldn't be, again, procedural box ticking, if we can say that. It should be aiming for real world impact. One conclusion from your book for me is that digital platforms should be seen as infrastructure. And when that's closed, biased, or exclusionary, it's not only a loss in competition, it's a lost opportunity, lost in innovation, lost choice, and it's the consumer that pays for that at the end of the day. DMA was meant to fix that, and it will succeed, but we need to be very clear in what we're hoping for, and that's where researchers come, and I think also we try to do as Code to advance this agenda and the discussion of what is effective interoperability really, and what it looks like. How can we track platforms that are truly open, interoperable, and only when they are, as opposed to when they're just ticking boxes, and how do we evaluate the gatekeepers' claims around security, privacy, and when they're just trying to delay compliance. So yes, a smart regulation, but only in the right kind of way. And let me just end very briefly with something. I think we need to support growth and not only manage the risks. And this is where I think probably we need to move away from DMA or beyond DMA and probably beyond regulation, and look at enabling building of ecosystems that are really allow experimentation, innovation, new entrants, rather than just regulating incumbents. I'll stop there, and then we can continue.
Let me build on that a little bit, because I think the openness, if you really have interoperability, you should be able to get this kind of entry and building and innovation. And just linking back to what you said, Manuela, about the Draghi report, I mean, I think we could draw a line from what you were saying and what's in the book to if you had an effective DMA that would help with innovation and growth. I mean, maybe you could say a sentence or two about that, how that would work and why it would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, indeed. So, speaking about the DMA today, that Apple released an official document arguing for the repeal of the DMA is an interesting occasion. But indeed, coming back to your slide at the end, no? And also to your last chapter of the book, on top of enforcement, we need regulation and industrial policy. And here DMA is one of the tools, but both target market failures, externalities, spillovers. One in a more defensive way, meaning imposing the limits to certain behaviors of gatekeepers. The other trying to be more active, industrial policy, as institutions in fostering firms' growth and the development of companies in the market, not through changes in enforcement or in inefficient subsidies. So now, on the front of the DMA, your words on the results on Opera are very encouraging for us, because the DMA is born precisely to, as I was mentioning before, to preserve contestability, for giving companies the possibility to enter the market, for startups, including American startups, to have an opportunity to be active. And now, on the DMA, many of our complainants are American. So even in America, there is a need, and and they want to stay secret, of course. But we know to some extent that this exists. In terms of industrial policy, here the challenge is a bit more delicate, because there on digital, what we're trying to do is to develop capabilities. And when we talk about capabilities, it is about incentives, how you bring incentives to companies in sectors that to some extent are not particularly developed within the European Union. A word of encouragement that I have is, for instance, in chips and semiconductor market, where the Commission has, with the CHIPS Act, fostered the investment in a particularly strategic sector, even though for applications to manufacturing, with mobilizing 40 billion euros, most of which private, for the construction of 6 plants in 4 member states. So there is an attempt on that front, but trying to preserve our objective of not disrupting the level playing field and having efficient subsidies.
But let me say that trying to build chips is super expensive. Yeah. One great thing about a regulation like the DMA that says, let's try to open up an interface, is that then you are creating legal certainty for a business that has a good idea that they can get to their consumers, and that the platform cannot take those consumers away. And when you have that legal certainty, you can get a venture capitalist or other investor to invest in your business if you have a good idea, because they are not worried that you cannot get any customers, or should you challenge the platform would cut you off. So I think it's a very pro-innovation type of regulation. It's not regulation saying, choose this price, choose this investment, here's what you have to make. It's not that kind of regulation. It's let's have a level playing field so that then we can have European business users who can come in, grow, innovate, offer more choices, do something different, like a children's app store, for example. So I feel it's quite consistent with the whole Draghi theme. Anyway, I don't know if you want to say something, Coco, and then audience should think of your questions, because we will turn to you
No,
next.
I absolutely agree. It's a very easy tweak. It just needs to be properly recognized, and also recognize that the devil is in the details, as always.
And enforced.
And that's we've seen. And I mentioned Opera, but on payments, we've also seen real progress. NFC's chip is now not blocked. But there are still things that are just very opaque for developers, for third-party users, and timelines in terms of documents, accessibility, treatment of your third party against your own app and devices are different, and it's just a question of what really means interoperability. But it's a very easy thing to fix and not as expensive as chips.
Exactly. Are there questions in the audience for anybody on stage? I have more questions if you don't. People are shy. Okay, then it will be my turn. So the behavior, speaking of things that aren't working, and keying off of Emanuela's point about behavioral biases, I think one thing that is quite difficult about interoperability is you have a technical element. Does this device work, or can the thing plug in? But then there is the behavior of consumers. Do you have a scare screen? Do you have how is the choice screen designed? How do we make sure that the consumer on the journey to choose something is not distracted or blocked or whatever from getting to the place they want to go? And I don't know whether code is mostly going to be worried about the technological element. Do you study this behavioral one? And I know, I can ask this question because I know economists do study the behavioral one, but I am interested in this element too, if you have reactions.
Yeah, so this is a question that, of course, we address academically, so the impact of behavioral biases, understanding what frictions they generate, but then in practice, going to specific cases, trying to understand how users react to certain settings, to certain disposition
Defaults.
of the page, default, is very complicated because we're not necessarily equipped to understand that.
Now, wait, just let me stop you. Why not make the platform do this kind of stuff? Okay.
I was about to get there, but acknowledging that this is an idea that we discussed before, and that exactly, I think, is a brilliant idea, and we're already trying to do that. And the idea consists in what? So if you think about drugs, in drugs, when we approve a certain drug, we go through tests, and this test requires submission of results of previous tests run by the companies to understand the effects of the drug. And digital platforms test their design all the time, and they keep this into their servers. And so what we're trying to do is to ask them to report what they did, understanding users' reactions, so trying to study what users did in response to a specific setting of the page, for example, or display of the results, would allow us also to have a better sense of what is the bias, the behavioral bias that applies to that case. So yeah.
We have been focused on hardware very much. And the reason was because first, there is a lot of documentation about software interoperability, but our members produce things, products, wearables, smartwatches. One of them is Garmin, for example. And we've always been very frustrated sometimes with one earbud that doesn't connect to the phone, or you don't have the same pairing experience, etc. So we conducted a study. So that's an angle that we have been quite focused, and we discovered. I mean, we didn't discover anything new. We knew that was the case, but in fact, it allowed better products, better businesses. I mean, and obviously, it's silly to say, but more competition. So that's an area that we have been particularly focused on last year.
Yeah. And this is not fully working, I think, because there are issues like, does the rival app store get to update the apps at the same time? Or if you fly to New York, your apps that you get in the Apple App Store work, but the ones you got on the other one don't, and things like that, which is a little bit technical.
It's very technical, and probably very technical for me, but I'll try to explain. It's developers don't have the same access, the same, some platforms choose not standard that are already proved and used elsewhere, like Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, etc., and they use their own proprietary, and that has a lock-in effect. Then they don't give access to the same APIs as they do to their own app and devices. The documentation takes very long to be processed, and it's very opaque, and then some small developers don't even know what to ask for. So that's also a problem. It's and then coming back to your infrastructure analogy, it's like, for us, interoperability is like a road where if you want to drive, you need to ask for a permit. The permit will come or not come a couple of months later by the time the train has passed. For small businesses, that's very that's quite an issue.
Let me check the audience and make sure nobody has come up with a question. This is so unusual. Such a big part of the economy. So fast moving. Okay. All right, very good. We have a question.
Yes, actually, the question was to you on the presentation of your book.
Yes.
MFE Media for Europe. I had a question on the search remedies that you proposed, and specifically on the divestiture for Google Android, because we've seen in the DMA that the Commission has adopted a device-specific approach, so only for smartphones. But we see that we have Google Android also. I mean, vocal assistants and search results on vocal assistants are getting bigger and bigger. So what was the, let's say, scope of your divestiture? Is it only for phones, or also, on other, I would say, devices?
I think you need that operating system to be neutral and not be strategically used to advantage some other part of Alphabet or to drive technology in a direction like more advertising. And so you take Google Android as it is defined as a CPS. So it's very important to distinguish between Android, the open source system, and Google Android, which is all the APIs that developers write for. Those APIs could be located inside Google Maps, inside Google Play. It doesn't matter where they are, but if a developer is writing for them, then a system that doesn't have those APIs will not let the app function properly. So the operating system that we care about is that collection of APIs. And it's not about where it is. Refrigerator, traffic light, handset, doesn't matter. Phone, TV, home security, it's everywhere. So I think you want that to be, that really is a utility in a certain sense, because it is so widely used, and it has so much market power because it is a monopolist. So I think having such a thing in a foundation, I mean, we see Linux Foundation and so on, where actually people are just contributing for no money in improvements and doing the R&D in that socially beneficial way. But if you had such a foundation, it could just charge per head for a license to Android, €7 or something, and then it would have plenty of money to pay engineers to do R&D. So I think with a proper mission and board and just say cover your costs and do something that's socially valuable and not biased toward any one competitor, this would free everybody, all the equipment makers, to design their equipment the way they want without worrying about retaliation from Alphabet. And then if the foundation did not advance the technology, it's an open source thing. It continues to be open source. Somebody who doesn't like that can just take it and fork it and make their own operating system. So we would probably get entry, which would be additionally good, because in mobile operating systems we have a problem. There's very little competition. Anyway, this is not an idea that I imagine anyone is actually going to do, because we live in a political reality that's very constrained. But I think it's important to understand what the right answer is so that you know how far away you are from the right answer. I don't know if either of you have an opinion about...
I would stay away from specific cases and remedies, if you may.
Yeah, no, it's not a specific case, really. It's just an idea for how to make things a bit more efficient. And this, going back to this innovation idea,
Yeah.
Amazon Fire did not work.
Yeah.
Now, that would not, in my view, have happened if they had had the full Android with all the apps and could have had the network effects that come from all the
Right.
apps.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah. No, the design of remedies is definitely super important. And we see this not just in digital, also in other markets. Taking an holistic view is appropriate because we need to understand the business model of developers and competitors. Otherwise, they risk being ineffective. On this, I completely agree.
No, I just think that it's a pity that there are some very good wearables that consumers perceive as not working properly or being lower quality just because the interoperability is not there yet, and that it's not because it's technically impossible, but it's a design choice.
So if you had a neutral Android foundation, it would publish APIs, and those would be symmetric for everybody, and yeah, it'd be more even. Yes, another question.
Hi, my name is Erica. I work for Milltown Partners. We're a tech consultancy. I have a question on effective compliance and the fact that it's a challenge that I cannot figure out, so I would like your help. Essentially, with the fact that the Commission cannot prescribe behaviors for compliance, and companies are also in the interest of actually postponing that compliance. And time is an essence, and with the AI innovation cycles, we are seeing that time crunch. What else is there? What other tools are there? Is the DMA, does it have enough? Do we have enough to push that and to shorten those, to shorten the compliance period, to actually have the market behaviors and corrections that we're expecting it to bring?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, I think Manuela probably doesn't want to say anything about this, but it's very difficult to start an entire new sectoral regulation, because the first thing that happens is you have platforms that just simply refuse to comply. I mean, the App Store, Apple's initial App Store regulation, the law required X, and Apple essentially did not X. And so then you open a non-compliance proceeding 4 days later, and a year later you find that they're not in compliance. Well, that is a legal proceeding. Then there is some time to comply, then there will be an appeal. Until you have had a couple of appeals and courts have come back with what the framework is and how they think the Commission is doing, you kind of can't go faster. Once we know what the courts are going to say, then it stops being something you need to litigate because you know what the answer is going to be, so you just move to the answer. And so it will speed up, in my opinion. What can we do? There are specification procedures. So there's non-compliance and there's specification, and the specification is a little bit more like what you were saying, but that cannot be used all the time. Because part of the genius of the DMA is that the regulator does not have to write the code and say, here's how you run your business. The regulator says, as you referenced, effective compliance. Get there. Make this interoperable in a non-discriminatory fashion. And so then it's really up to the company to come back and say, okay, we have a solution, is this compliance? But as you say, if it were profitable to do that, they would have done it already. So by definition, it's not profitable. They don't want to be there, and so there's a lot of foot dragging, and this makes the enforcement very challenging, especially when I think your typical European corporation thinks that it's supposed to be a good corporate citizen. I think some of these platforms don't take that view. Their view is, I will keep every dollar I can, and you have to make me. And that is a more challenging regulatory environment. Anything you want to add?
I would just add, it's a great answer, but I would like to add that there is also a role for economists, and there is an additional provision of the DMA, which is the anti-circumvention provision, which allows us to intervene when companies, precisely because certain things they cannot do, may try to put in place practices that are not essentially the same, but try to achieve the same results or the same effects. And this is something on which economists have particular economic analysis is particularly useful, because we are good at understanding incentives and understanding what can happen, what is more likely to happen when you do certain things.
I forgot about anti-circumvention. That is another tool in the law. Okay, I think we are at 2:30, so we are supposed to wrap up, and so I will not keep you beyond the time which you very generously offered, and it's much appreciated to have you both here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you.
And
thank you.
Thanks to the audience for coming, and we will see you all next time. Oh, and download the book.